just do what you want to do and keep doing it and do the best that you can.
Awesome. Well, we're so privileged to have you with us. Phenomenal background. I have to start by saying congratulations, right? It makes a big difference when it's women as accomplished as you that are leading the charge, and can't wait to dive deeper into this conversation. Courtney, thank you so much. I know it's super early for you, so really appreciate you joining us. Want to hear more about your background, your current role at Angel City, and words for people watching us at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So happy to be here. To add on to, what I'm doing here at Angel City FC, we've, had this club 2 years in the making, and we'll get into some of those nuts and bolts later, but there was a lot of expectation around this role. And so coming into it early on in the project where we've really had no blueprint, no club has been built this way before. And so I've taken my experience, working in soccer and in the commercial side of soccer at multiple levels here in the US and internationally, to really build something special and something that's never been done before. So having those stops in different clubs and certainly at the Federation for the US, it was really able to kind of hone all those skill sets, but then really put it to a purpose, and knowing that we are really pushing the women's game forward day in and day out in the commercial space, where we've seen, not as much focus on. So all these stops that I've had in my career, I feel like have really led me to Angel City, for that exact reason, that we have the talented group to really push this entire sport forward. So really looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. There's a couple of words that we're already hearing about purpose, so we'll make sure to dive into that a little bit later. But hopefully for everybody watching us, as you can see, we're truly privileged to be joined by two amazing women, and I'm sure we all going to get a lot out of this conversation. So, Courtney, you just talked about this being the first season of Angel City in the NWSL, which for those of you watching this is the U.S. Women's Professional League in the United States. So obviously you already have 2 matches under your belt, but as you talked about, you started making headways and headlines before you even took the pitch, right? There was a lot of great coverage around your unique approach to partnerships and how you were engaging with fans and the community. Can you start us off by talking about the challenge your leadership saw in starting a new team in the NWSL and how they decided to tackle these challenges? Also, please, any lessons that you think are good to share with the audience would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned it before, but 2 years in the making is a long time when you have a club and a runway, and certainly coming out of this global pandemic. I think everyone has shifted their mindset as a consumer, both of sport and of brand, over those 2 years. And I think we came in really understanding that we needed to position ourselves properly. Our market here in Los Angeles has 11 other professional sports teams and 1 other professional women's sports team, the Sparks here in the WNBA. So that in itself, I think on the outside, you think, wow, the cards are stacked against you. How did you do that? And of course, that's not even the collegiate sports that we have here, UCLA, USC, that are also very storied and high level. So I think some of those challenges early on from the outside, looked pretty steep, but on the inside, I think we never thought that. One, because we know the potential that women's sports had. There's just not been a focus of how do you make this a day in and day out property that people want to engage with. And so from that lens, we approached our uniqueness of our community in a lot of different ways. And we always knew that showing up for Los Angeles in particular was really important. So we developed our 10% sponsorship model. So really leaning into how do our partners also show up in the community here in LA? And so with that, 10% of all of our sponsorships go to a community project. And so with that, there's a ton that we are able to do for good, that our partners are uniquely, tied into. But some of those other, hills that we had to climb were definitely the busyness of the market, and some of those purpose-driven initiatives, I think, really helped us early on to carve our own path, because we knew we stood for more. And we've always said that capital and community can coexist, and we live that every day. Every room that we're sitting in, if it's a commercial decision or a community decision, we think about how those two things live together. So I think those different mindsets of a team never really committing like that to affect the community positively, throughout the club, I think just helped us really pave our own way early on. And then from the start, having just the backing that we did, of course, helps. But I think more so, it just opened some doors that we still had to deliver. And we were just able to really think of our community first.
That's great. No, like I said, definitely a very unique approach. And I know talking to some of your leadership, it's been an approach that has really delivered results. So can't wait to hear more about that and how the partners are embracing and how they're bringing their partnerships to life. Well, Marzena, obviously being at a federation, your mandate and then the challenges are a bit different. So can you share with us what those challenges have been? Which ones have you prioritized? How you're going about addressing them? And what other federations can learn from your experience?
Well, I think explaining, as we spoke earlier before we started this panel, how I explain my role, it's the simplest term is that the men's game is like a highway. It has 4 or 5 lanes. It's got big blue signs all over it. Everybody knows which way to go. You tell them, how to participate, where to watch. It's all there. It's very obvious. The women's game is an overgrown footpath that we are all of us are desperately trying to clear. And we see the partners, the media, the broadcasters, they're our diggers. They're the ones that are helping us widen that footpath to make it accessible. And actually, the biggest challenge that we have right now is there are so many people trying to get onto that footpath that there's not enough of us to turn it around quick enough and actually make things happen. The game over the last 5 years is growing so exponentially that we're finding it really hard to keep up. We've got a home Euros. We've smashed all our own records here in the UK. COVID hit us over an 18-month period, and we did go backwards a little bit. But now we can see the upturn where the public are seeing more confidence. Spectators are coming out again, and slowly we're rebuilding the position that we were at in November 2019. We had 77,000 come and watch England play Germany at Wembley. Now that on a miserable November day was incredible to see these thousands of people coming, predominantly young families, coming down to watch England play. That for me is where we've got this opportunity, and the growth of the Barclays WSL. When Barclays committed their sponsorship back in 2018, that was a game changer, one of the biggest deals, because they believed there is the opportunity to make a difference for women's sport. They'd committed to the men's game for many, many years and had a history in the game, in the Premier League, and they wanted to commit for themselves into the women's game. And an AGM that Barclays had, it's hugely positive and successful, is the women's element of their sponsorship property.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, I truly believe that partners like the media partners and this brand partners are a big part of this equation for it to work, right? Obviously, it might sound a little bit funny coming from the person whose title is commercial officer, but the reality of it is it takes money. A lot of times people ask me, what does it take to really be able to start turning the tide? And I truly do believe it takes money, right? Money invested in the right way, because money just being thrown around does not help anybody. And that money needs to come from the media partners, from the brand partners, et cetera. To expand a little bit, to present to our audience the full picture, I think that Liga MX was very smart in putting this panel together, because obviously we have Courtney at a club level, Marzena at the federation level, and myself at the confederation level. And to expand a little bit on that from a confederation, the biggest challenge is our confederation has 41 members, right? And we have 41 members that have what we call 41 very different and unique realities. And a lot of times people have looked at us and say, well, you have nothing to worry about in women's football because you have the world champion United States, and now we have the gold medalist in Canada. And we kind of talked about it, say that's 2 out of 41, even do the percentage, that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the work that we have to do. And for us, it's very important because we actually do still have countries that it is a little bit taboo for young girls to play the sport, right? So we have to come in and really start creating programs that allow the access, for the players to their stories to be told. So maybe another young girl can be inspired and say, wow, that story is very similar to mine, or her background is very similar to mine. If she did it, why can't I do it, right? I think we all need that role models, right? For those of us who played sports, if you think about, most of our role models were the ones we had access to, right? If the things that you saw on TV, for me growing up in Puerto Rico, most of my female role models are Olympians, because that's the sport that I had access to watching for women's sports. Outside of that, there was not much else that I could see. So it's important to make sure that, from our perspective, we really focus on three things, right? The first thing is, telling the player stories, because we want to create that inspiration and those role models. We also want to focus a lot on leveling the playing field. And leveling the playing field is not just about the discussion that has really taken the headlines in the United States around pay equity. It's about everything. I don't realize that most people don't realize still that most women don't get to play in women's uniforms. Right? In a lot of countries, you're still playing with men's uniforms, or they don't have the name, to your point, Marzena, about the highway, right? Like there's certain things that are already working on the men's game that haven't even been addressed on the women's game. And then the last thing is, like I mentioned, is how do we get more people into the pipeline? But we want to do it in a way that is not just about the product on the pitch, right? Not everybody's going to have the skill set to make their national team, but there's plenty of people that can be coaches, right? Technical directors, people that can be referees. We also want more women to be also in the VAR room, but we also want them to be directing the matches and producing. At CONCACAF, we have our own broadcast academy to get more women to learn about producing football matches so that they can have a career path that way. So it takes a lot, right? And hopefully, to your point, we can continue to dig and clear up that debris that we all encounter. But it takes all of us collectively to do that. So you mentioned some of the records, Marzena, about the game, and that, like you said, November, probably the weather wasn't great, and to have an audience that large is remarkable. We also saw that recently with Barcelona, right? They broke 2 attendance records, during their Champions League run. And it seems that they really are capturing the imagination of their community. And I do believe a lot of that has to do with how La Liga has approached this narrative of, like, if you're a Barcelona fan, like, then you have to support both, right? Like, Barcelona is the whole system, not just the men. But what other things you think has been key for them to accomplish this? What are you extracting from that? What can the rest of us learn from it as well?
So we went, some of our team went over there to Barcelona to see the game, and have learned a lot from that in terms of how they engage with their partners, and in terms of community ticket offers. And I think what you said there about one club, that is important. A football fan is a football fan. And actually, we shouldn't be talking about women's football or men's football. We're talking about football, and it's either or. And we changed our approach to our audience and positioning after 2017, 2018. We were initially targeting girls to watch the women's game, but actually it's a very small audience. And then we looked at it again and said, actually, it's the passionate player that we want to be chasing, because that's much wider target that we can reach. And also we know that we call them dadvocates. So the dads that have daughters, that they will want to bring and can talk to them and bring them to the games. And we see that the audiences that we have are slightly skewed male. So we can't alienate the male spectator and fan. It's a passionate player. And if you love your club, whether it's the men's or the women's team. And I think Chelsea just yesterday at the game, if you saw that fan audience, it was incredible. Sellout crowd for Chelsea winning the Barclays WSL. And it was a mixed audience, and that's what we love.
Mm-hmm. No, excellent point. And I think I remember, I think I shared with you before we started, I started my career at the WNBA, the Women's Basketball League. And I think going back, I remember being in a meeting, and I think that was their biggest surprise, was the amount of men that were going to the game, right? It really shifted. And I think, again, it goes back to this whole notion of role models. Something happens, my brother, his first child was a girl. Something happens to a man when he has a girl, right? And immediately he might start understanding things and prioritizing things that maybe he didn't prioritize before, which is, who is that role model for my daughter? I want my daughter to be strong. I want my daughter to feel like she's capable of anything. So it creates a very interesting opportunity, because a lot of times it's the men that also want to make sure that this succeeds for their daughters, their nieces, or whoever it can be. So it's important. And I want to talk a little bit more about what you mentioned later, because I think that's one of the things that we see too often, that people focus on the women part of football versus the football part of it. So I want to talk a little bit about that and how we can help others focus more on football. But Courtney, you mentioned at the beginning about your strategy for with the 10% of the revenue being allocated. My understanding is across like 3 primary pillars: equity, essentials, and education. Obviously, you've had great success leading into a season, but can you share with the group a little bit more how that works and how the voice the partners have had, and how you're leveraging this for the benefit of the club and the community?
Absolutely. And I just want to mention one thing from those comments and previous points made. The Barcelonas, the Chelseas that have shown these great audiences, certainly us in our first game and our second game last night, we think those are not outliers. And I think the more that we verbalize that and treat it as not you did one thing, awesome, right? It is ongoing. It's just an indicator, again, that there is a market that fans will purchase tickets, that they will buy merchandise and all the things that we know is possible. Like, it just needs to be talked about in that way continuously, that it's not an outlier. And I think for so long it has been treated that way. Certainly in our league, teams like Portland that have continued to draw in big crowds are great, but we say that a lot internally, just that's not an outlier. This is continuous. Every market can do this. And that's also—
let's stop being surprised, right?
Yeah,
totally. Like, as much as we want to brag about that and showcase it, that's great. But how many times does the men's team sell out a crowd every single time and no one's surprised, right? That's not your top news line when a male team, sells out a crowd for a big game. That's standard. We should be really expecting that. So I think that's just a narrative and a mindset shift that everyone, no matter if you're working in men's or women's sports in general, outside of soccer or football, like you need to have that mindset. So a lot of that language I think is really important, of course, in media, but just internally, how groups of people like this talk to each other is really important. But yeah, going back to our 10% model. So it truly was born the first day that we started talking about our commercial strategy and really showing up for our community. Again, kind of in this COVID era of coming out, we knew that it was extra important for brands that want to show up authentically. And we kind of felt that we could be a real catalyst for them to do that. Of course, sports always has had this very communal sense. I think women's sports in general has even more sense of community because it hasn't been given the shine that it has for so long, that there's, you find someone who's a fan of your women's team and it's extra special. So really going into our 3 pillars of equity, essentials, and education, really how that comes to life is we talk about this in every single pitch that we have with a prospect client. This is a huge piece that matters to us as a club. It matters to our literal community here in Los Angeles. But it is absolutely talked about in those early conversations. And we really have this opportunity to dream with our partner. And we have a really great kind of hybrid setup with our commercial side and sponsorship team, as well as our community, and the understanding of, okay, 10%, what can we do, right? Where is our community needing, support? What groups exist here in LA that need that support? And we've really taken the approach of listening first to what the need is, and then going back to the partner with, hey, this fits our brand, both Angel City brand and the brand partner themselves, and really just build out a great program that is impact driven first. And then, of course, the storytelling that we want to do around it, how we're showing up together, which authentically ties that brand partner and Angel City together. So, to name a few, we have, tons of programs going on right now. We even started doing this last year, having not signed a single player, not played a single game. We were retaining revenue in that kind of pre-year in 2021, which is incredible. And now, taking that to the next level here in 2022. So one good example is our front of shirt partner, DoorDash, is really honed in on early on in the pandemic of delivering meals to people in need. Certainly their platform enabling that, but we've already donated 80,000 meals in this calendar year with the dollars that we've taken from the sponsorship. So that's a continuous year-long program. Each program will look a little bit different, the partners themselves and just the mechanism that we're doing. But it's really, really focused on listening to our community and then looping in the partners and saying, you're authentically tied to this because we care about this too. And the reception has been incredible. We hope that each end of year recap and end of term recap that we're talking about impact first. That's no different than how we pitch them. Of course, all the other amazing things, invisibility and signage, all that fun stuff. But this is going to be a key, piece of our recap and what we want to actually talk about of lives being impacted with our partnership, which I just think takes the whole ecosystem of sponsorship to the next level. And we feel really strongly that, this is a path forward that a lot of other clubs can take. And hey, if every other club, not just in our league, but across the world, take on a model like this, like what great can we actually do in the world is pretty powerful to think about.
Yeah, you bring an excellent point, and it's something that gets us all to think about, and we can now keep an eye on this to see who copies this model, right? And not just in women's sports. To your point, hopefully this is something, because a lot of times people will say, well, I have a foundation, right? And then we put certain money through the foundation, and then through the foundation we're able to do. But a lot of times the foundation and the main club itself are not as connected, right, as they should be. So very smart. And I can tell you, we had a lot of conversations when we first met with your colleagues and started hearing about it, because obviously at CONCACAF we're like, hey, it's brilliant, because for we talk about this all the time. That's what we do, because we're a confederation, right? We're a not-for-profit as a confederation. Everything that we do gets reinvested in the sport. But we even realize maybe we're not doing a good enough job explaining that to people, right? To be able to understand that everything, every piece of every dollar or every hour or whatever that you dedicate to us really makes a big difference, not only in the lives of these women, but in the communities, etc. So very brilliant. And I'm so happy for the success you have achieved, and can't wait to see others, copying the model for real.
You. We have seen it a little bit already, and we actually take that approach overall of like being that blueprint, right? And wanting to show that to clubs and say, go beat us in ticket revenue or sponsorship revenue, because that elevation of everybody, the saying that I overuse, the rising tide lifts all ships, like say that till I'm blue in the face. But, truly we want that, so we have seen actually another club in the NWO style who's taken on a give back model, even our ownership group, how, expansive it is with many different investors coming into the fold and, elevating our brand. We've also seen other clubs in our league, I believe 3 others, that have taken on that approach of adding different folks to the fold for that extended reach. So very much in line with how we're set up as a club.
Excellent. Well, we started at CONCACAF talking about this year being the year of the women. In particular, I think across all of the confederations, it's a phenomenal year, because a lot of us have our youth competitions, their youth World Cups, but we also have CONMEBOL's Copa America Femenina. We have the UEFA Women's Euro that Marzena mentioned earlier. We have our CONCACAF W Championship. All of these are important competitions leading up to determine which teams, federations will represent us in 2023 in Australia, New Zealand for the FIFA World Cup. Marzena, let's start with you, right? This is one of these moments in time where all of these things are happening. Great Champions League, great success. What do you hope to see from each of these competitions? What can you want from the organizers, the players, the fans, the sponsors, the media? How can we all take this momentum and make it groundbreaking so that maybe we can finally get to that tipping point of women's football?
Well, for me, we have to start planning now. And everyone talks about legacy. What is the legacy from the Euros? Legacy, if you start thinking about it after the event, you've missed it. So we've been planning since the day we won the bid. We started to plan, how can we capitalize on this tournament? You have to capitalize, and you have to start to build. So we're working with all our host cities, and we're working in a way that we're engaging with the clubs. We're engaging with the city, with the community, in every area where there will be a women's Euro match and part of the tournament, to try and build from it like almost like a jam jar that you overfill, and then it spills into the other regions and other areas. And that for us is most important. We've got a moment this year to capitalize on this catalyst when it will grab everyone by surprise when the first match on the 6th of July, when they kick off, everyone will suddenly go, oh my God, it's here, it's happening. And I wish I had tickets, because the tickets will have sold out for every game, I'm convinced. And people will be chasing everywhere to try and find them. And this is the growth. This is the speed of growth that we have. And it was interesting, one of your discussions earlier about revenue and commercialism. We started thinking reach over revenue, because you need to get eyeballs. You need to get that profile out there first in order to then build and drive revenue. So our initial focus was reach, get people to see the sport. And once they've seen it, once they've seen that actually it's football, and whether it's men or women, you can actually just watch the game. Once we got it out there, we used free to air, whether we did it on our own FA Player platform, that started to create the visibility, which then you get the knock on. It's our virtuous circle. You build profile, brand, participation, success. It all goes round in a positive circle.
No, and it's a great point, Marzena. I mean, one of my former bosses at the agency, he always said, follow the money. You have to understand how money gets made, right? And I think you're absolutely right that how money gets made is eyeballs, and I hate because it's the expression people use, butts and seats, right? And then engagement. That's how. So you have to really think about, it's not just about generating revenue, it's about really leveraging the different tactics that then lead to revenue generation. So how do you get more people to watch? Well, you have to make it easy to watch, right? You have to make it accessible, and then you have to put a high quality product to watch, right? And that's something, as I mentioned earlier, we have an academy for broadcast because there was not, believe it or not, there's not a lot of football TV talent in the United States, right? They're baseball, basketball, and sometimes early on you will watch some of those matches, even some of the NWSL matches, and you have to have a strong stomach because it was really tough to watch, right? The quality. So it's really thinking about how the triggers of money. So Courtney, obviously you're just getting started, NWSL season, they wrapped up the Challenge Cup, but as you see, right, you have players that will be participating in the Women's Championship, hopefully qualifying into the World Cup next year. How do you think about this? How do you use these moments in time to help you grow the NWSL in Angel City?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really, I think, an RC using our platform to really educate in the bigger picture and the bigger story of soccer, football everywhere, right? These massive tournaments, the year that we're going to have, and of course, leading into Women's World Cup next year, like this is also testing ground for that, of how we engage our fans of Angel City to really follow the players elsewhere. We want them to go follow one of our players, Alison Swaby, plays for Jamaica, right? And like them understanding why that's important is kind of our role as a club, right? We're not necessarily in the weeds, Marzena, you're going to put on a great, competition. It's going to be awesome. We don't have a hand in that, but how are we really utilizing our fans to further that even at distance? And I think, we're at this point of like, okay, the momentum is here. We have our players and really leaning into that. I think something really important is also sharing the individual stories of players. You talk about a gateway to really be in the fold and understand the ecosystem. If you care a lot about one player, Sam Kerr winning, last night or whatever it was a couple of days ago, and the amazing story that she has and a player, right? That's such an entry point to following and understanding this big ecosystem. That I think spending that time and energy on individual player stories, what they're like on and off the field is really a key component. And I think something that followers of women's football really, really care about. So I think that's a smaller tactical thing, but I think it's something that we can lean into and really prepare our audience here in LA and across the world that follow Angel City, that they can help support, these amazing competitions we have coming up.
But it's also, you talk about Sam Kerr, you talk about the football skills. For one of the things that we're focusing on this summer is actually to talk about the quality of the players. And we've changed and we're talking about a show and a showcase and the skills, not just about the fact that they're women. Actually, these are skilled football players. Sam Kerr, what she achieved yesterday was sensational, and you had everyone talking about it. It was a worldie goal. And that was a worldie goal in the scale of football goals, not women's football. And it's almost, we keep pushing ourselves into one little corner, but actually it's much wider than that. And that's what's changing. I think there's a real sea change now that they are becoming accepted as skilled football players.
No, it's an excellent point, and let's build a little bit upon that, because so we had at CONCACAF, one of our first presentations we ever did with our women's football, it caught a lot of people's attention because we said that football is the most democratic of sports. And everybody looked at us and kind of said, why? And I said, well, think about it, right? Same size field, right? Okay, well, other sports might have the same size field, right? Basketball, same size court, etc. But same size ball. Now you get into basketball, it's not the same size ball between the men's and the women's game, right? Same size goal, right? In other sports, right? In volleyball, the net is a little bit lower in the women's game. On golf, the tee is a little bit closer on the women's game, right? Between men's and women's tennis, right? They play more sets than the women. While in here, it's the same amount of time, the same amount of substitutions, everything, all the rules of the game are the same, right? So it's the most democratic of sports. So to your point, Marzena, these are footballers, very skilled at that, right? And you still see the whole variety of, like, you have some of the quicker players, the smaller, quicker players. Then you have the more stronger, physical, airborne players. You see it all. So how do we start getting people to really appreciate that, and have the partners, media cover them as football and footballers versus women's empowerment and, things of that nature?
Well, that's where you change your campaign. So we've changed our campaign on the Barclays WSL, and we're focusing very much on the skills and the cut and thrust of the game, and that it's football. That's how we're changing it. Less about the way that they've had the long journey, and it's been really tough, and they couldn't play when they were kids. Yes, that is important, and we do that. We have that voice and that story and that journey in a very different aspect of what we do in terms of participation to make sure that we work within schools. But actually, for the Barclays WSL, for England internationals, these are skilled football players, and that's how we want to show them. And so it's about the brand campaign. And I'm sure Angel City will be doing the same over the years, that these are skilled players. And yes, you also want their profile and everything else, but actually they are skillful individuals.
Yeah.
And that alone is a business case. Like, yes, all the things you talked about, right? And the different elements of who the brand is, who the players are off the field. But yes, like that in its core is enough to be a business case. I don't think that's said enough either. And we also hope that becomes the norm, right? That we are talking about their skill level in a very normal setting, and we are comparing them to everyone else purely on their skill.
Excellent. So you ladies are phenomenal. We are doing so great managing our time and really diving into some of these questions. So this is where we get a little philosophical, right? This is, I don't know about you, I know a lot of athletes have their vision boards, right? Where they kind of get psyched before the game. They kind of visualize their careers. I don't know if you follow, recently there was a great profile on a player that was drafted in the NFL of the American football #2. He started journaling, and in his journal, he wrote about how he wanted to be a Heisman Trophy contender and be drafted by the NFL, and wrote all of these things as a 5-year-old and 6-year-old. So I'm giving you, what is in your vision board, right, for women's football? Marzena, we'll start with you.
My vision isn't for women's football. My vision is for football. And it's for football to just be open to everyone, whether it's men or women. And I'd love to see the day that when you say England are playing, or Chelsea are playing, or Arsenal are playing, that people will say men or women. They ask me, so whose match are you going to, men's or women's? That's for me when we've achieved full integration within the clubs, within the international sector. That's when it makes sense. When the Euros are not women's Euros, it's just Euros. That's that. If we can achieve that, that for me will be. I actually say that I have to work myself out of my job, and then I don't need to be there. They don't need a head of marketing commercial for women's football. And once I've worked myself out of a job, I've done my job, because it's fully integrated into the FA. That women's football is sat alongside. We've done so well over the last 5 years. When I started, there was one person working on the women's partners within the partnerships team. Now every single member of the partnerships commercial team has to work on men's and women's football. And that's the way it should be. And then I'll do myself out of a job.
Agree. I think that's what we all want, right? Absolutely. How about you, Courtney? Obviously, starting with Angel City, only 2 games in, a lot of runway ahead for you.
Yeah. Well, that was beautifully said, Marzena. I mean, truly the goal, right? That there is no differentiation. We talk about a tournament, a competition, anything like that. There, it's seen as a level playing field. But I think for us, certainly, this exciting year will, have its own twists and turns. But I think for me, personally, what I want to see is that tide lifting the other boats. Like I want to see other clubs in our league beat us in revenue, right? Because that's a signal that not just, okay, there's an audience. We know that there's an audience, but that the clubs themselves are asking for the proper dollars. They're, pricing things out accordingly to value their own products, right? Like that's really what we've done. And it's still kind of novel, I think, in the women's game of just, you have to ask for what you're worth and what you believe your worth is, which is such a microcosm for women everywhere in every society and every industry, right? Our property is no different. So I think that mentality, I don't want to ever get asked that question of like, well, how did you do that? Well, we built a platform that is warranted of the dollars we've asked for, and we can do that because there's an audience for women's football globally now. And I want others to do that. So, in a similar spirit of what's been said already, just, not having to explain that every single time because no one's questioning how, top men's clubs anywhere, like, how do you make that money? Well, they've asked for it, in many ways. And of course, there's the follow through, and that's part of my job, making sure that all comes to life. But, it's the mindset from the start. I think that's really important.
Believe in your product.
Yeah, agree. And absolutely. And I think to build upon that for us at CONCACAF, our vision board is pretty expensive because of the 41 members, right? But I think our dream would be to make sure that football is widely accepted, right? And that we have 41 members with 41 U15, U17, U20, and senior national teams. And you know what? It's not about, we always talk about it, it's not about winning World Cups. It's about the power of what this could represent. If we can have young women get discovered at the U15 and get an opportunity to get a college scholarship and get a college education out of this, that could really be transformative for a lot of these people. And that's a lot of what we hope is, if you think about our vision board, that's what we want is teams at every level, at all 41 members. We want to make sure that our competitions, to your point, that our phones are ringing because people is like, how do I get into your competition versus just the FIFA. And we also want to make sure, as we'll talk a little bit, is we're hopefully working with FIFA. We'll have our own Women's Champions League coming up in 24 and making sure that that's also a very successful platform. So that's kind of, I think, the dream, and it's a very beautiful dream. And I'm very energized when I see all the type of caliber of women working on this. So I think we're kind of wrapping up. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity is, I'm sure a lot of the people that are joining us today might be starting in their careers in football, or particularly want to understand how to navigate into women's football. So what advice would you be able to offer them based on your career path, your lessons learned, the obstacles that you've encountered? So why don't we start with you, Courtney?
Sure. One thing for me that has really helped in my career is finding really great mentors, finding people that you want to emulate and be around, and that can look like a lot of different things, certainly how they carry themselves or how they work day in and day out, but just finding those allyships, and especially in the women's game, if anyone's interested in that particularly, these types of conversations, finding those people that think about it in the same way is really, really important. But on the personal level, I think that's really key for furthering any career. And kind of overarchingly, I think specifically in the women's game, hire talented people, for anyone that's thinking about working in women's sports. I think that's still kind of not as standard as it should be, of just finding the right talented people to do their job for a women's team or women's property. I think will help elevate everyone. But definitely on the personal side, finding mentors and good people around you, and choosing those opportunities based on the people you work with and who you can learn from is really important, and something that I've been fortunate to have in my career.
Great. How about you, Marzena?
For me, well, I have my personal 3 non-negotiables that I always believe in, which is, the first one is integrity. So just be honest and true, and treat people how you want to be treated. Be committed and work hard. So that for me is also important as an individual, and ultimately have fun. If you're not having fun, then that ruins everything. And in terms of progress, just be yourself and do your very best. And the line that I love, that I repeat all the time when it comes to, where should you go and mentorship and everything, is lift as you climb. Don't tread on everyone and push them down. Lift everyone with you, because you don't know where someone will end up. And I have friends from 20, 30 years ago that I'm still in touch with now that I've helped, and they've gone on different careers. So just remember that as you move through, and just believe that you can. There's no door that is closed. It's only closed if you want it to be closed.
That's great. I shared with the panelists, for those of you who haven't had a chance to know my background, I'm an electrical engineer. I used to work as a military consultant at the Pentagon when I decided to give it all up and work in sports. So I'm sure you can imagine the faces that I got as I started doing informational interviews, and people would look at my resumes. In college, I had the privilege to do my internships at NASA. So all they saw is an electrical engineer, minoring in robotics, that works at the Pentagon and worked at NASA and wants to work in sports. And I had a lot of doors shut in my face. And so I always tell people, be a boxer. And people look at me and say, what does that mean? And I said, think about a boxer. A boxer gets knocked and you hear it, you see their faces, and they're on the floor. And you're watching at home saying, stay down. Like, please, like, stay down. Like, just do not take any more punishment. But they are wired to try to get up, right? They just keep trying to get up. And that's my suggestion is you're going to encounter a lot of roadblocks in this. But if you believe in what you are trying to do, if you're driven by that passion, and that passion to actually realize this is a business, because I think that's where a little bit sometimes people lose track that their passion, they very love the sport, but they don't realize or contextualize that it is a business. Then that's going to be the key. So we have about less than 5 minutes to go. So before I do my last closing statement, I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes to give parting thoughts for our audience. So Marzena.
Oh, I go first. For me, I think everyone should just look at this vision that we just want to grow football. We want to grow football and make football be the best global sport in the world. And in order to do that, we have to make it open to everyone. And therefore, let's not close it down in one key area where we've got 50% of the human race is female. So let's let them play football. That for me is the simplicity of what we're trying to achieve. And there is no reason why they couldn't. We just have to, we've got a bit of time to make up. You know, in England, we're back by about 50 years, but we are growing and we're going to continue to grow. There's a huge opportunity ahead of us. And I think everyone's going to grab it with both hands.
Excellent. Courtney?
What she said. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, we had the privilege of having Billie Jean King in our first game last week. And you talk about a vision of where she's been in her career and what she's done for women everywhere, and specifically women in sports. And I think she was asked an interview while at the game, you know, what's the tipping point? And I think her response was to the effect of, we're in it. We've created a tipping point. And I think there is no time to waste. We have to act and assume that the tipping point is here, because no one is really doing this. The conversations that we're having, the work that the three of us are doing, we are doing the work now, and the tipping point is here. So I think having the mindset of being a bit bullish, because we have to be, asking for what we're worth, and assuming that the audience will come through, because it's been proven now to do that in many countries at many different times. There is no outlier here. The movement is coming, and it's happening before us. So I think having that mindset will continue to elevate women's football everywhere. And these next 2 years, I think, are so critical. The competitions that we've already talked about happening this year, Women's World Cup coming next year, and the effect that we've already seen the previous World Cups have, and now sustaining it through clubs, teams that we all, speak to and talk to and work with. That's where that real sustainability happens. And I think we are now in Angel City, that example, for that day in and day out, fill, right? We have the audience that's ready to watch, and we are here now every week, very available for anyone to come watch. So I just think being really bullish right now and believing that the tipping point has happened and we're in it, is really special.
Great. Thank you. Well, before I kind of go into my closing remarks, I definitely want to make sure that, I'm visiting both of you. I will definitely be at, and I hope that if your schedule allows, you're able to come see us at the RW Championship in Monterrey, Mexico, this summer. I'm very excited about what we are doing at CONCACAF for the women's game. I kind of equate us a little bit to The Little Engine That Could, if you read that book as a child. Pure determination, but we will get there. And I learned a lot from this experience. So thank you. This is the time that we have available, but we used it and maximized it so well. I want to again thank you, Marzena and Courtney, for your openness, your great insights. I wish you all the success in the world with the work that you're doing. And to Marzena's point, hopefully we won't be needed in a year's time frame. Early retirement is not a bad thing, I heard, so we can definitely explore that. I also want to thank Liga MX for putting this great event together, and Mariana Gutierrez, who leads the Liga MX Femenil, for the kind invitation. And to everybody that joined us today for this discussion, I do hope you were able to gain a lot from it and now start going back and thinking about how you too can become part of the solution to build awareness for the women's game and just grow the game overall. Like we talked about, please think about what will be in your vision board now. So thank you again, and please continue to stay tuned to the Summit Liga MX 2022. Thank you. Goodbye.
Extraordinaria charla en un marco donde además la CONCACAF hoy es uno de los grandes espacios para desarrollar el fútbol femenil. Tenemos a la potencia más grande en la historia de este deporte, como lo es la selección de los Estados Unidos, pero también por el otro lado, ¿no? Los cambios tan grandes que se están dando en el Reino Unido, como por ejemplo poder observar una de las portadas de las revistas más importantes e icónicas de aquel lugar con futbolistas profesionales, ¿no? Por el campeonato que va a suceder en el Reino Unido. Entonces creo que el dar el mensaje a la par que se está desarrollando de mejor forma el deporte es la mejor forma de hacer crecer no solo en popularidad, sino en forma y fondo al fútbol femenil.
Pero más que respaldado con buenos patrocinios. Mientras aquí hablamos de un nuevo nicho, el fútbol femenil, nos damos cuenta que a nivel mundial hay muchas marcas que están realmente interesadas en fomentar esta disciplina futbolística con las damas. Bueno, señores, estamos cerca del final, pero no queremos irnos sin leerlos y que sean parte de este magno evento. Sigan en contacto con nosotros a través de #SummitLigaMX. Hacemos una pausa y volvemos con todos ustedes.